Assalamualaikum. Good morning. I'm Abdul Hafez bin Zahruddin, a lecturer from the Center for Foundation Studies, Nilai University. I will be sharing my study on educators' knowledge, attitudes, and practices on education for sustainable development in Malaysia Private University. This research was conducted at a Malaysian private university and focuses specifically on educators as they are key actors in translating sustainability policies and institutional commitments into actual teaching and learning practices. In this presentation, I will briefly outline the background, methodology, key findings, and implication of the study. Before I begin with this presentation, let me talk about the background of the study. Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD, has gained increasing global attention as a response to complex challenges such as climate change, environmental degradation, social inequality, and economic instability. According to UNESCO, ESD goes beyond environmental education. It aims to develop learners' knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes so that they are able to contribute responsibly to sustainable societies. ESD is also closely aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which further highlights its relevance and urgency within higher education context. Before moving further, it is important to briefly clarify what we mean by Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD. ESD is an educational approach promoted by UNESCO that aims to empower learners to contribute to sustainable societies. It goes beyond simply teaching about environmental issues. Instead, ESD integrates three key dimensions of sustainability, which are environmental protection, social equity, and economic viability. These dimensions are closely linked and must be addressed together rather than in isolation. ESD is also explicitly aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which provide a global framework for addressing sustainable challenges. Importantly, ESD focuses not only on knowledge but also on developing skills, values, and attitudes. This includes competencies such as critical thinking, systems thinking, problem solving, and responsible decision making. In higher education, this means moving beyond content delivery towards teaching approaches that encourage reflection, interdisciplinary learning, action oriented engagement with real world sustainable issues. Ladies and gentlemen, let me further clarify education for sustainable development. It is helpful to understand the three pillars of sustainability that underpin the concept. The first pillar in the middle is environmental sustainability, which focuses on protecting natural resources, addressing climate change, and maintaining ecological balance. The second pillar is social sustainability, which relates to social equity, inclusion, human rights, quality of life, and community well being. And the last pillar is the third pillar, which is economic sustainability, which emphasizes responsible economic growth, efficient resources use, and long term economic viability. The three pillars model is widely used in sustainability literature and is explicitly embedded within UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development framework, which underpins this study. Education for Sustainable Development integrates all three pillars rather than treating them separately. This is important because environmental, social, and economic challenges are interconnected. Now, let me explain about the role of educators in ESD. Higher education institutions are often described as key drivers of sustainable development because they shape future professionals, leaders, and decision makers. However, institutional policies alone are not sufficient to ensure meaningful implementation of ESD. Educators play a crucial role because they design curricula, choose pedagogical approaches, and determine how sustainability is presented to students. As highlighted in previous studies, educators' knowledge, attitude, and practices strongly influence how sustainability is understood and enacted in the classroom. Moving to Malaysian higher education context. In Malaysia, sustainability education is well supported at the policy level. National initiatives such as the Malaysia Education Blueprint for Higher Education and the National SDG Roadmap explicitly emphasize the role of universities in promoting sustainability. Despite these strong policy directions, empirical studies indicate that the actual implementation of ESD across higher education institutions remain uneven. Differences can be observed across institutions' disciplines and particularly between public and private universities. Now let's talk about the research gap. Most existing research on ESD in Malaysian context has focused on public universities or on student awareness of sustainability. Comparatively, fewer studies have examined educators' perspectives, especially within private higher education institutions. In addition, many studies have examined isolated aspects of sustainability, such as awareness of curriculum content, rather than using an integrated framework. This study addresses these gaps by applying a knowledge, attitude, practices framework to explore educators' readiness for ESD implementation in a private university setting. The main aim of this study was to examine educators' knowledge, attitudes, and practices related to education for sustainable development. More specifically, the study sought to assess educators' understanding of ESD and the Sustainable Development Goals, examine their attitudes towards integrating sustainability in higher education, and lastly, to analyze how ESD is reflected in their self-reported teaching practices. Together, these objectives provide a holistic picture of educator readiness for ESD. Now allow me to explain about the methodology of this study. This study adopted a quantitative research design using a structured questionnaire. The survey was administered to 22 academic staff members from various faculties at the Malaysian private university. Participation was voluntary and unanimous. The questionnaire was developed based on the knowledge, attitude, practices framework and used a 5-point Likert scale. Data analysis focused on descriptive statistics and exploratory comparisons to identify patterns rather than to make broad generalization. If we look at the overall findings, we can see a clear pattern across the three KAP dimensions. Based on the table, educators demonstrated a high level of knowledge of ESD with a mean score of 4.14, indicating strong conceptual understanding of sustainability and the SDGs. Attitudes toward ESD were very positive as well, with a mean score of 4.42, reflecting strong support for integrating sustainability into higher education. However, ESD-related practices were reported less consistently, with a mean score of 3.89, suggesting a gap between readiness and implementation. The finding shows that most educators, reported that they were familiar with ESD concepts and recognized the relevance of sustainability to higher education. Educators also strongly agreed that sustainability should be integrated into university curricula and that educators have an important role to play in promoting ESD. These findings are consistent with previous studies in Malaysia, which generally report favorable attitudes towards sustainability education among university educators. This suggests that resistance to ESD is not the main issue. When examining teaching practices, educators most frequently reported incorporating sustainability related topics into their courses and discussing real world sustainability issues with students. These practices indicate engagement with ESD at the content and discussion levels. However, deeper forms of pedagogical integration were reported less consistently. These include aligning learning outcomes with the Sustainable Development Goals, embedding sustainable competencies, and integrating sustainability into assessment design. This highlights a key implementation gap. Overall, the findings suggest that high levels of knowledge and very positive attitudes toward ESD do not automatically lead to consistent teaching practices. Similar gaps between awareness and practice have been reported in previous Malaysian and international studies on sustainability education. This indicates that the challenges are not primarily individual but structural and contextual in nature. Factors such as curriculum rigidity, workload, limited training opportunities, and lack of institutional incentives may constrain educators' ability to implement ESD more systematically. When we talk about implication for private universities, these findings have important implication for private higher education institutions. While educator readiness is a strong foundation, it needs to be supported by institutional structures. Universities should invest in targeted professional development, provide guidance on curriculum and assessment design, and encourage alignment with the SDGs. As highlighted in the literature, effective ESD implementation requires coordinated, institution-wide strategies rather than isolated on individual efforts. Now let's talk about the limitations and future research. This study has several limitations that should be acknowledged. First, it was conducted at a single private university with a relatively small sample size, 22 lecturers, 22 educators, which means the findings cannot be generalized beyond the immediate setting. Secondly, the study relied on self-reported data, which may not fully capture actual classroom practices. Future research could involve larger, multi-institutional studies and adopt mixed method approaches such as interviews or classroom observation to gain deeper insights into ESD implementation. In conclusion, this study shows that educators in a Malaysian private university generally possess high levels of knowledge of ESD and very positive attitudes towards sustainability education. However, the ESD related practices are less consistently implemented, particularly at the curriculum and assessment levels. Bridging this gap requires institutional support, structured professional development, and systematic curriculum integration. Ultimately, educators remain central to advancing education for sustainable development in higher education, but they need enabling conditions to do so effectively. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope the findings shared today contribute to ongoing discussions on how education for sustainable development can be strengthened in higher education. Please feel free to leave any questions, comments, or reflections in the comment section. Your feedback and perspectives are very much appreciated. Thank you, and I look forward to your thoughts. Bye bye. Assalamualaikum.